The white envelope sat on my kitchen counter like a silent accusation. Inside, my sister Emma's beach wedding invitation listed every family member except one name that should have mattered most. My mother's voice echoed through the phone with clinical precision as she explained why I wouldn't be included in the celebration. "Rod, you know how these things go. Your condition would just make everyone uncomfortable during such an important day. Emma deserves a perfect ceremony without any distractions or awkward moments." I absorbed her words with the practiced calm of someone who'd heard similar explanations for 27 years. "I understand, Mom," I replied quietly, already knowing this exclusion would cut deeper than all the others combined. Growing up with Tourette's syndrome in my family felt like carrying a secret that everyone desperately wanted to forget existed. My mother Patricia had perfected the art of managing my presence at family gatherings with military efficiency, always positioning me where my involuntary tics and vocal sounds would cause minimal disruption to her carefully orchestrated social events. Emma, 3 years younger, but worlds apart in family standing, had learned early to treat me like a distant acquaintance rather than her older brother. While she excelled in school and later built a successful marketing career, I remained the family's unspoken burden that required constant strategic planning to minimize embarrassment. My father, Harold, an electrical engineer who spent most evenings buried in technical manuals, generally deferred to Patricia's decisions about family dynamics. He developed a habit of nodding absently whenever discussions about my attendance at events arose, trusting my mother's judgment about what would be best for everyone involved. The pattern established itself during my teenage years when Patricia began creating elaborate excuses for my absence from important occasions. During my high school graduation, she seated me in the back corner of the auditorium, far from where relatives gathered for photographs. When I received my acceptance letter to college, the celebration dinner excluded me because Patricia claimed I had developed sudden stomach flu that would be contagious to our visiting grandparents. Emma's promotion party at 25 marked another milestone in family exclusion. Patricia suggested I had food poisoning rather than explain to colleagues and friends why her son occasionally made involuntary sounds or movements. The lie felt easier than education, and I learned to accept these fabrications as normal protective measures that kept family peace intact. My successful career as a software developer never seemed to register with my family as evidence of my capabilities. Despite working for a prestigious tech company downtown and maintaining my own apartment in a nice neighborhood, Patricia continued viewing me through the lens of limitation rather than accomplishment. She'd trained herself to see my condition first and my humanity second, a perspective that gradually infected how Emma and Harold interacted with me as well. Years of family gatherings where I remained strategically absent or positioned in backgrounds had taught me to expect rejection rather than inclusion. When relatives visited, Patricia would often suggest I had prior commitments or work obligations that prevented my participation in meals or activities. This constant editing of my presence from family narratives left me feeling like a ghost in my own bloodline. The most painful aspect wasn't the exclusions themselves, but the realization that my family genuinely believed they were protecting me from embarrassment, when in reality, they were protecting themselves from having to explain or defend my existence to others. Their shame about my neurological condition had become so ingrained that they couldn't imagine anyone accepting me as I naturally existed. My apartment became my sanctuary, where I could experience the peace of not constantly monitoring my tics or anticipating disapproving glances. Within those walls, I'd built a life my family knew nothing about, filled with professional success, meaningful friendships with colleagues who appreciated my problem-solving skills, and a growing sense that their version of protection had become indistinguishable from rejection. The wedding invitation's arrival forced me to confront how thoroughly my family had written me out of their important moments. Emma's special day would proceed without any acknowledgement that she even had a brother living 30 minutes away, successfully building his own life, despite the neurological differences that my family found so threatening to their social comfort. This latest exclusion felt different because it came with such clinical certainty from Patricia. There was no discussion, no consideration of compromise or accommodation. The decision had been made with the same matter-of-fact efficiency she used to plan dinner parties where my potential presence never entered the conversation. As I stared at the invitation that hadn't included my name, I realized I'd spent my entire adult life accepting a version of love that required me to make myself invisible to receive it. The weight of that recognition settled over me like a heavy blanket I'd been carrying, without realizing how much it had been suffocating my sense of self-worth. Emma's wedding day arrived with the kind of perfect California sunshine that made beach ceremonies look effortless in magazines. I spent the morning in my apartment, deliberately avoiding social media, while knowing that every family member would be sharing carefully curated moments from the celebration I'd been deemed unworthy to witness. By afternoon, curiosity overcame my self-protective instincts, and I opened Facebook to see the first wave of photos appearing from the ceremony. Emma looked radiant in her flowing white dress, surrounded by cousins, aunts, and uncles who'd traveled from across the country to celebrate her new beginning with her fiancé David, a real estate attorney she'd been dating for 3 years. The comments section beneath each photo told a story that made my stomach drop with sickening realization. When distant relatives asked about family members they hadn't seen in years, my mother had crafted responses that completely erased my local existence. "Where's Rod these days?" My cousin Jennifer had written beneath a group photo of the immediate family. "Oh, you know how it is," Patricia had replied with casual dismissal. "He moved away for work several years ago and couldn't make it back for the wedding. He lives so far away now that we rarely see him anymore." The lie hit me like a physical blow. I lived 27 minutes from the beach where Emma had just exchanged vows, close enough to have easily attended the ceremony and reception without any travel complications. Yet my mother had fabricated an entire narrative about my geographic absence to explain why her son wasn't standing beside his sister during one of the most important days of her life. More comments revealed the depth of my family's revisionist storytelling. Several relatives seemed genuinely confused about my identity, as if I'd become a vague memory from childhood gatherings rather than a living, breathing family member with a current address and phone number they could have easily accessed. "I can barely remember Rod," my uncle's wife had commented. "Wasn't he much younger than Emma?" "Actually older," Emma herself had responded. "But he's been out of state for so long that we don't really stay in touch much anymore." The conversation continued, with casual references to my absence, as if it were a natural geographic inevitability rather than a deliberate family choice. Nobody questioned why a brother would miss his sister's wedding, accepting the distance explanation as perfectly reasonable. I scrolled through dozens of photos, showing extended family members who'd made genuine efforts to attend Emma's celebration. Great aunts had flown in from Florida. College friends had traveled from different time zones, and even David's childhood neighbors had received invitations to witness the ceremony. Yet I, the groom's future brother-in-law living less than 30 miles away, had been systematically excluded and then erased from the narrative, entirely through carefully constructed lies about my fictional relocation. The emotional impact of discovering my family's deception went beyond simple hurt feelings. They hadn't just excluded me from the wedding. They'd created an alternative reality where my absence made perfect sense to anyone who might question it. The lies protected them from having to explain or defend their decision, while simultaneously protecting their image as a loving, complete family unit. As I continued reading comments and viewing photos, a different kind of clarity began emerging through my initial pain. For the past 2 years, I'd been building a life that my family knew absolutely nothing about, filled with people who not only accepted my neurological differences, but genuinely appreciated the unique perspective and gentle humor that came with my authentic self. My relationship with Sarah, a special education teacher who'd entered my life through volunteer work with children who had various learning and developmental differences, had shown me what unconditional acceptance actually looked like in practice. Through her eyes, I'd begun understanding that my Tourette syndrome didn't define my limitations, but rather represented one aspect of a complex, capable person, worthy of love and respect. Sarah's family had welcomed me with warmth that felt revolutionary after years of my biological family's careful management of my presence. Her parents, both retired educators, found my insights valuable and never once suggested I modify my behavior to make social interactions more comfortable for others. The contrast between my family's wedding day lies and the genuine acceptance I'd discovered outside their narrow worldview created a moment of profound awakening. While they celebrated Emma's new beginning with carefully edited family narratives, I realized I'd already begun my own transformation through relationships built on authenticity rather than shame. Sitting in my apartment while my family danced at a beach reception that couldn't accommodate my existence, I felt something shift inside me. The pain of exclusion remained sharp and real, but underneath it grew a stronger foundation of self-worth that no longer required my family's approval to validate my value as a human being. Their lies about my fictional distance had accidentally revealed a deeper truth. I had indeed moved away from them, not geographically, but emotionally and spiritually, into a space where my complete self could exist without apology or explanation. Meeting Sarah 2 years earlier had happened during one of those volunteer events that people join, hoping to make a small difference in someone else's life, never expecting their own world to change completely. The community center's special needs program needed technical volunteers to help children learn basic computer skills, and I'd signed up thinking my software development background might prove useful. Sarah appeared that first Saturday morning like a force of nature disguised as a elementary school teacher, organizing craft supplies, while simultaneously comforting a 6-year-old having a meltdown and explaining adaptive learning techniques to confused parents. Her special education background had taught her to see potential where others saw problems, and she approached every child's unique challenges with creativity rather than frustration. When my first involuntary tic occurred during a lesson about mouse navigation, triggering a brief head jerk and vocal sound, I automatically tensed for the familiar, awkward silence that usually followed such moments. Instead, Sarah continued her explanation without missing a beat, treating my neurological response as naturally as she would any other normal human behavior. "Everyone's brain works differently," she told the children later when one asked about the sounds I sometimes made. "Rod's brain just has its own special way of expressing itself, kind of like how some people talk with their hands or tap their feet when they think." Her matter-of-fact acceptance created space for the children to ask genuine questions rather than stare with uncomfortable confusion. By the end of that first volunteer session, my Tourette's had become as unremarkable as any other characteristic, acknowledged, but not treated as something requiring management or apology. Our friendship developed gradually over weeks of Saturday morning volunteer work. Sarah would save me coffee and homemade muffins, and we'd discuss different children's progress while cleaning up after activities. She possessed an uncanny ability to recognize individual strengths that traditional education systems often overlooked, and I found myself sharing insights about problem-solving approaches that complemented her teaching strategies. The first time Sarah invited me to dinner with her family felt like entering an alternate universe where my condition wasn't a source of tension requiring careful navigation. Her parents, Robert and Linda, both retired teachers with 40 years of classroom experience between them, welcomed me with genuine curiosity about my work and perspectives. When my tics occurred during dinner conversation, Robert asked thoughtful questions about how my brain processed different stimuli, approaching my neurological differences with the same intellectual interest he might show toward any fascinating subject. Linda shared stories about students she'd taught who had various learning differences, creating connections that made me feel understood rather than unusual. Sarah's younger brother Marcus worked as a wedding videographer, specializing in non-traditional ceremonies for couples who wanted their celebrations documented with artistic sensitivity rather than cookie-cutter formality. He immediately understood the creative potential in capturing authentic human moments, regardless of how those moments might deviate from conventional expectations. Through Sarah's family, I discovered that acceptance didn't require pretending my Tourette's didn't exist or trying to minimize its impact on social situations. Instead, true acceptance meant incorporating my complete self into relationships without asking anyone to edit their personality to accommodate my comfort levels. As our friendship deepened into romance, Sarah helped me recognize how years of family conditioning had taught me to apologize for taking up space in the world. She encouraged me to notice how I'd learned to make myself smaller, quieter, and less noticeable as a survival strategy that no longer served my adult life. "You don't need to earn the right to exist as yourself," she told me one evening while we worked on a coding project together, my tics occurring naturally while I concentrated on problem solving. "The people who matter will love you because of who you are, not despite it." Our relationship evolved with remarkable ease once I stopped anticipating rejection and started trusting that her affection was genuine and sustainable. Sarah appreciated my methodical approach to challenges, my gentle humor, and the unique insights that came from experiencing the world through a neurologically diverse perspective. 6 months before Emma's wedding, during one of those comfortable domestic moments when Sarah graded papers while I debugged code, she looked up from her work with that expression I'd learned meant she had something important to say. "I know this might sound backwards," she said, setting down her red pen, "but I think you should be the one to propose to me." The suggestion surprised me because traditional gender roles had always felt complicated given my family's treatment of me as somehow less capable than conventional men. But Sarah understood that asking me to take that step would help me reclaim agency in defining our relationship on our own terms. 3 weeks later, I proposed during a quiet walk through the botanical gardens where we'd often spent weekend afternoons. My tics occurred naturally during my proposal speech, and Sarah's joyful acceptance included them as part of the moment, rather than something to overlook or edit from the memory. Planning our wedding became an exercise in designing a celebration that honored authenticity over convention. We wanted guests to feel comfortable expressing themselves naturally, creating space for the kind of genuine human connection that transcends social awkwardness or performance anxiety. Marcus offered to document our ceremony with the artistic vision he brought to unconventional weddings, while his girlfriend Diana, a social media manager, suggested we consider sharing our story online to help other families understand neurodiversity in positive contexts. Initially, the idea of public exposure terrified me because my family had taught me to view my condition as something requiring privacy and careful management. But Sarah helped me recognize that hiding authentic love stories perpetuated the shame that had shaped my entire relationship with my own identity. Through her support, I began imagining what it might feel like to celebrate a wedding where my neurological differences were treated as natural parts of the person she'd chosen to marry rather than obstacles requiring accommodation or explanation. Planning our wedding became a revolutionary act of reclaiming celebration from the forces of shame and social expectation that had governed my family experiences for decades. Sarah and I chose the Montclair Botanical Gardens as our venue specifically because the natural environment encouraged guests to relax and appreciate diverse forms of beauty rather than conforming to rigid ceremonial standards. Our guest list reflected the community we'd built together rather than obligatory family connections. Sarah's parents, her brother Marcus with his girlfriend Diana, my supportive coworkers from the tech company, several families from our volunteer work, and children from Sarah's special education classes created an atmosphere of genuine acceptance and celebration. We designed the ceremony with sensory-friendly elements that acknowledged different neurological needs without making anyone feel singled out or accommodated. Quiet zones throughout the garden provided retreat spaces for guests who might feel overstimulated, while multiple seating options allowed people to position themselves wherever they felt most comfortable during the proceedings. The morning of our wedding day dawned with perfect September weather, crisp enough for comfortable outdoor celebration, but warm enough for the flowing outdoor ceremony we'd envisioned. I woke without the anxiety that had preceded every family gathering throughout my adult life, replaced instead by excitement about celebrating authentic love with people who genuinely supported our relationship. Sarah looked breathtaking in a simple but elegant dress that reflected her practical beauty and warm personality. She'd chosen to wear her grandmother's pearl earrings, connecting our new beginning to family history that embraced rather than rejected individual differences. Marcus positioned his cameras strategically throughout the garden to capture natural moments without intrusive direction or artificial posing. His artistic approach focused on documenting genuine emotions and spontaneous interactions rather than forcing conventional wedding photo expectations on our unconventional celebration. When the ceremony began, I felt my familiar tics occurring naturally as I stood beside Sarah in front of our gathered community. Instead of tensing with embarrassment or trying to suppress my neurological responses, I allowed them to be part of the moment, trusting that everyone present understood and accepted my complete authentic self. My wedding vows included references to the journey of learning to love myself through Sarah's example, acknowledging how her acceptance had taught me to recognize my own worth beyond my family's limited perspective. When involuntary sounds interrupted my speech, Sarah's radiant smile reassured me that these moments added meaning rather than distraction to our promises. Sarah's vows spoke about discovering unexpected joy in loving someone whose perspective challenged conventional thinking, and whose gentle spirit had taught her new ways of seeing strength and resilience. Her words created space for my neurological differences to be understood as gifts rather than burdens requiring management or apology. The ceremony concluded with cheers and applause from guests who seemed genuinely moved by witnessing authentic love that didn't require either person to edit their personality for social acceptance. Several children from Sarah's classes threw flower petals with enthusiastic abandon, creating the kind of joyful chaos that would have horrified my mother but perfectly captured our celebration's spirit. During our reception, toasts came from unexpected voices that honored different aspects of our relationship and individual growth. One of Sarah's former students, now a teenager with autism, spoke eloquently about how our relationship had shown him that differences could be celebrated rather than hidden or overcome. Rod and Sarah taught me that the right people will love all the parts of you, not just the easy ones, he said, his words carrying wisdom that many adults struggle to understand. They show each other kindness every day, and that's what real families do. Marcus captured these spontaneous moments with artistic sensitivity, creating footage that revealed the beauty and authentic human connection rather than performed perfection. His video documented laughter, tears, dancing that included various movement styles and energy levels, and conversations between guests who might never meet at conventional social gatherings. As evening approached and our reception continued under string lights Marcus had arranged throughout the garden, I experienced something I'd never felt at any family celebration: complete belonging, without performance anxiety or self-editing. Every person present had chosen to celebrate our love freely, creating community based on genuine affection rather than social obligation. The dancing portion of our reception included music chosen specifically to accommodate different sensory preferences and movement abilities. When my tics became more prominent during fast songs, other guests adjusted their own dancing naturally without making me feel self-conscious or different. Sarah's parents shared stories about recognizing early signs that our relationship was built on mutual respect and authentic appreciation. They described watching me gradually relax into my natural personality over months of family dinners, noting how their daughter's happiness increased as she helped me discover my own worth. Late in the evening, as we prepared to leave our reception, I looked around at the garden filled with people who had celebrated our love without requiring us to minimize or edit any aspect of our authentic selves. The contrast with my family's careful management of my presence at their events felt profound and liberating. Marcus approached us with excitement about the footage he'd captured, explaining how the natural authenticity of our celebration had created unusually powerful documentation. His artistic vision had transformed our wedding into visual storytelling that might help other families understand neurodiversity in positive rather than problematic contexts. This could really change how people think about differences, Diana suggested, her social media expertise recognizing potential impact beyond our immediate community. Your story shows love that celebrates rather than tolerates individual characteristics. Driving away from our reception with Sarah beside me, both of us exhausted but completely satisfied with our wedding day, I realized we'd achieved something my family had never imagined possible. Celebration that included, rather than excluded, my complete authentic self, creating joy for everyone involved, rather than anxiety about managing awkward moments. 3 weeks after our wedding, Marcus finished editing our ceremony footage into a 12-minute video that captured the essential spirit of our celebration without exploiting or sensationalizing the neurological differences that had been naturally incorporated into the day. His artistic approach focused on genuine emotion and authentic human connection, rather than creating inspiration content that might reduce complex people to simple narratives. Diana helped craft a social media caption that explained our story with respect and accuracy, avoiding both pity-inducing language and overly cheerful inspiration speak that disabled people often find patronizing. Her expertise in viral content creation balanced authentic storytelling with strategic presentation that might resonate across different online communities. "Love doesn't require perfection," the caption began. "It requires authenticity, acceptance, and the courage to celebrate differences rather than hide them." Rod and Sarah's wedding shows what happens when families choose understanding over shame. The video's initial sharing across Diana's professional networks gained modest traction among special education communities and neurodiversity advocates who appreciated seeing positive representation of neurological differences in mainstream celebrations. Comments from viewers shared personal stories of family rejection and eventual acceptance, creating conversation that went beyond simple inspiration. Within a week, several disability rights organizations had shared the video with larger audiences, praising how it presented neurodivergent individuals as complete people deserving celebration rather than tolerance. The footage resonated particularly strongly with parents of children who had various neurological differences, offering hope that their kids could find love and acceptance in adulthood. Major news outlets began picking up the story when the video reached over 1 million views, recognizing its potential to challenge stereotypes and promote understanding about neurological diversity. Television producers reached out requesting interviews, seeing opportunity to explore changing attitudes toward conditions like Tourette syndrome in family dynamics. Sarah and I carefully considered media requests, eventually agreeing to a few interviews with journalists who demonstrated genuine interest in education rather than exploitation. My growing confidence through months of marriage had prepared me to speak publicly about my experiences without shame or apology. During our first television appearance on a morning show, I spoke clearly about the impact of family rejection on neurodivergent individuals, while emphasizing that my story had ultimately become one of finding authentic acceptance rather than remaining stuck in victimhood narratives. "The people who love you will find ways to include you," I explained to the interviewer. "The people who don't will find excuses to exclude you." Learning the difference helps you invest your energy in relationships that actually sustain rather than drain your spirit. Sarah contributed insights from her special education background about how families can support rather than suppress individual differences, offering practical suggestions for creating inclusive celebrations and gatherings that honor everyone's needs without requiring anyone to perform normalcy. Our media appearances generated additional attention for the wedding video, pushing view counts into multiple millions, while creating conversations across social media platforms about family acceptance and neurological diversity. Comments revealed countless stories of people who had experienced similar rejection from families who struggled to understand or accommodate differences. The video's viral spread brought it to the attention of my hometown community, including people who knew my family professionally and socially. Patricia discovered our wedding footage when a coworker showed it to her during their lunch break, recognizing me despite years of my absence from family gatherings and social events. "Isn't this your son, Rod?" her colleague asked innocently, not understanding the complicated family dynamics that had led to my systematic exclusion from important celebrations. I had no idea he was so articulate and successful. "This wedding looks beautiful." Patricia's initial shock at seeing me confident, well-spoken, and clearly beloved by a community of supporters gave way to deeper discomfort as she realized how completely she'd misjudged my capabilities and potential for meaningful relationships. The video provided undeniable evidence that her assumptions about my limitations had been fundamentally wrong. Emma discovered the viral video through her own professional network when colleagues shared it across marketing industry, social media groups, praising its authentic storytelling and positive representation of neurodiversity. Her recognition of me in wedding footage created immediate guilt about her own role in perpetuating family patterns of exclusion and misunderstanding. The contrast between the Rod she thought she knew and the Rod documented in Marcus's wedding video forced Emma to confront how thoroughly she'd accepted her mother's narrative about my supposed inability to function successfully in social situations. The evidence of my professional achievement, meaningful relationships, and articulate self-advocacy contradicted everything she'd been taught to believe about my condition. Harold learned about our viral wedding video when several of his engineering colleagues forwarded it through their professional email networks, impressed by my clear communication skills and obvious technical competence. His pride in my accomplishments competed with growing awareness of his own passive participation in family decisions that had systematically excluded me from important events. Comments on the video from viewers who knew our family peripherally began creating social pressure for them to explain why such a clearly capable and beloved family member had been absent from Emma's recent beach wedding. The public nature of our celebration made their exclusionary choices visible to extended community members who had previously accepted their explanations without question. As the video's popularity continued growing and media attention intensified, my family faced mounting evidence that their shame about my Tourette syndrome had caused them to reject not a burden requiring management, but a son and brother capable of building meaningful relationships and contributing valuable perspectives to any community willing to include him. 2 months after our wedding video reached 5 million views and generated features in major publications, Patricia and Emma appeared at my apartment door on a Thursday evening, their unannounced visit carrying the weight of years of unspoken guilt and newly confronted realizations about their treatment of me. I opened the door to find my mother clutching her purse with white knuckles, while Emma stood slightly behind her, both women looking uncertain about their reception after decades of treating me as a family afterthought, requiring careful management rather than genuine inclusion. "We need to talk," Patricia said without preamble, her usual commanding tone replaced by something that sounded almost like pleading. "We've seen your video, and we realize we may have made some mistakes." Sarah emerged from our kitchen where she'd been preparing dinner, her protective instincts clearly activated by the tension radiating from my unexpected visitors. Her presence in our shared space immediately communicated to my family that I wasn't living the isolated, limited existence they'd imagined for someone with my condition. "Please, come in," I said calmly, my voice steady despite the emotional complexity of seeing family members who had systematically excluded me now seeking access to the life they'd never bothered to understand. "Would you like some coffee?" Patricia and Emma entered our apartment with obvious surprise at finding a beautifully maintained space filled with evidence of my successful career, meaningful relationships, and rich personal life. Wedding gifts displayed on shelves, professional awards mounted on walls, and photographs documenting adventures with friends created a picture of abundance they'd never imagined I could achieve. Sarah graciously served coffee while observing my family's shock at discovering how completely they'd misjudged my capabilities and circumstances. Her easy confidence in our shared space contrasted sharply with their obvious discomfort at having their assumptions challenged by undeniable reality. "Rod," Patricia began hesitantly, "we had no idea you were living like this. We thought, with your condition, that you'd probably struggled more with independence and relationships." The admission revealed how thoroughly my family had convinced themselves that excluding me from important events was actually protecting me from situations I couldn't handle successfully. Their narrative about my limitations had become so entrenched that evidence of my accomplishments genuinely surprised them. Emma spoke with tears forming in her eyes, her successful marketing career having taught her to recognize authentic success when she saw it. "I never really knew you as a person," she admitted quietly. "I only saw your Tourette's and assumed that was all there was to understand." My tics occurred naturally during our conversation, but the confidence I'd developed through Sarah's love made them feel unremarkable rather than embarrassing. Sarah's easy acceptance of my neurological responses demonstrated to my family what genuine accommodation looked like in practice. "I built this life because I had to. I explained without anger but with firm clarity. When your family treats you like an embarrassment, you either internalize that message or you find people who see your actual value. I was lucky enough to find people who chose understanding over shame. Patricia struggled visibly with confronting her role in my exclusion, her defensive impulses competing with growing recognition that her protection of family reputation had come at the cost of rejecting her own son. Years of justifying her decisions by focusing on my supposed limitations crumbled when faced with evidence of my success and happiness. "We were trying to protect you," she said weakly, the excuse sounding hollow even to her own ears. "Social situations seemed so difficult for you, and we thought it was kinder to spare you the stress of events where people might not understand. You were protecting yourselves," I corrected gently but firmly. "You were protecting yourselves from having to explain or defend my existence to other people. That's not the same thing as protecting me." Sarah contributed her professional perspective about families who successfully support neurodivergent members, explaining how education and advocacy create inclusion rather than exclusion. Her calm expertise highlighted how my family's approach had been based on fear and misunderstanding rather than genuine care for my well-being. The conversation continued for over 2 hours, as Patricia and Emma gradually confronted the reality that their assumptions about my limitations had been fundamentally wrong. They'd missed years of my professional growth, personal development, and relationship building because they'd been too focused on managing their own discomfort with my condition. Emma apologized repeatedly, her guilt compounded by realizing that her recent wedding celebration had proceeded without acknowledgement that she even had a brother living nearby and achieving success in his chosen field. The viral video had forced her to recognize me as a complete person rather than a condition requiring family management. Harold arrived later in the evening after Patricia texted him our address, his presence, adding another layer of family reckoning, as he acknowledged his own passive participation in decisions that had systematically excluded me from important family moments. "I should have spoken up," he admitted, his engineering background making him appreciate the logical flaws in arguments that had rationalized my exclusion. "I deferred to your mother's judgment about social situations, but I can see now that we were solving the wrong problem." The evening concluded with my family beginning to understand that reconciliation would require more than acknowledgement of past mistakes. Sarah and I had built a life based on authentic acceptance, and any relationship with my biological family would need to honor those same values rather than reverting to patterns of conditional love. I set clear expectations for moving forward, explaining that my condition was a permanent part of who I am, and that future relationships with family members would need to accommodate rather than manage my neurological differences. The choice was theirs about whether they wanted to learn and grow or continue prioritizing their comfort over genuine connection. "I'm not interested in being the family secret anymore," I told them, as they prepared to leave. "If you want a relationship with me, it has to include all of me, and it has to include Sarah as an equal family member. Those aren't negotiable terms." The months following that difficult Thursday evening conversation brought gradual but meaningful changes to my family dynamics as Patricia, Emma, and Harold each took different approaches to rebuilding relationships they'd nearly destroyed through years of exclusion and misunderstanding. Patricia enrolled in a support group for families of neurodivergent adults, slowly learning about Tourette's syndrome from medical and social perspectives, rather than the shame-based assumptions that had guided her parenting for decades. Her weekly attendance at educational meetings represented the first time she'd actively sought information about my condition rather than simply managing its social implications. Through the support group, Patricia met other parents who had successfully created inclusive family environments for children with neurological differences. Their stories challenged her long-held beliefs about what accommodation looked like and helped her recognize that her protective instincts had been misdirected toward avoiding discomfort rather than promoting genuine well-being. Emma took a more professional approach to her education, enrolling in disability awareness, training through her marketing company, and following neurodiversity advocates on social media to better understand the experiences of people like her brother. Her industry expertise helped her recognize how representation and authentic storytelling could challenge stereotypes rather than perpetuate them. She began sharing articles about neurodiversity with her professional network, using her platform to promote understanding while slowly educating herself about the intersection of family dynamics and neurological differences. Her colleagues' positive responses to educational content encouraged her to continue learning rather than remaining stuck in guilt about past mistakes. Harold, true to his methodical engineering nature, approached reconciliation by seeking concrete ways to demonstrate support for my accomplishments and relationship with Sarah. He attended one of our community volunteer events and spent time observing how I interacted naturally with children and families in educational settings. His scientific background helped him appreciate the complexity of neurological differences, while recognizing how my unique perspective contributed valuable problem-solving approaches to technical challenges. For the first time, he began seeing my Tourette's as interesting brain function rather than problematic social behavior. The transformation process wasn't linear or without setbacks. Patricia occasionally reverted to suggesting modifications to my behavior during family gatherings, requiring gentle but firm reminders that acceptance meant accommodation rather than elimination of my neurological responses. Emma sometimes struggled with replacing pity-based concern with genuine respect for my autonomy and capabilities. 6 months after our initial confrontation, Sarah and I hosted our first extended family dinner in our apartment, creating controlled conditions for practicing new interaction patterns with support systems in place. The evening tested everyone's commitment to authentic acceptance rather than performed tolerance. Patricia arrived with homemade dessert and genuine questions about my work projects, demonstrating her growing ability to see me as a complete person with professional interests worth discussing. Her conversations included natural references to my Tourette's, without treating it as a topic requiring avoidance or excessive focus. Emma brought her fiancé David to meet me properly for the first time, having explained our family history and her own learning process about neurodiversity acceptance. David's genuine interest in my software development career and easy comfort with my tics suggested that Emma had done meaningful educational work in preparing him for our relationship. Harold contributed technical insights to discussions about accessibility in software design, creating professional connections between my career and his engineering background. His ability to engage with my expertise, rather than focusing on my condition, marked significant progress in our father-son relationship. The dinner conversation flowed naturally between topics ranging from Sarah's teaching innovations to Marcus's latest video projects, to Emma's marketing campaigns for disability advocacy organizations. My tics occurred throughout the evening, without disrupting the flow of genuine family connection built on mutual interest rather than obligation. As we cleared dishes together, Patricia approached me privately to acknowledge how much she'd learned about Tourette's syndrome through her support group participation. Her questions about my experience came from curiosity rather than concern, representing a fundamental shift in how she approached our relationship. "I realize I spent your whole childhood trying to fix something that wasn't broken," she admitted quietly. "I was so focused on making you fit into my idea of normal that I never took time to understand who you actually were." Emma's transformation included advocacy work within her professional sphere, using her marketing skills to promote authentic representation of neurodivergent individuals in advertising and social media campaigns. Her personal growth had evolved into professional mission work that honored, rather than ignored, her learning process. The evening concluded with plans for future gatherings that incorporated lessons learned about creating inclusive family environments. Sarah's suggestions about sensory-friendly hosting and flexible social expectations became family standards rather than special accommodations for my supposed limitations. Harold offered to help with technical aspects of our volunteer work, contributing his professional skills to adaptive technology projects that supported children with various learning differences. His practical involvement demonstrated commitment to understanding rather than simply tolerating my community and interests. A year after our wedding video went viral, our family relationships had evolved into something unprecedented in my experience. Genuine connections based on mutual respect rather than conditional acceptance. The people who chose to grow had created space for authentic relationship, while those unwilling to change naturally faded from regular contact. My story had become one of transformation for multiple people, not just personal triumph over family rejection. Patricia's involvement in neurodiversity education had helped other families avoid the mistakes that nearly cost her a relationship with her son. Emma's professional advocacy work had created positive representation that challenged stereotypes for countless viewers. The life lesson that emerged from our journey was simple but profound. Authentic acceptance creates stronger bonds than conditional love ever could. When people are allowed to exist as their complete selves rather than edited versions designed for others' comfort, relationships become sustainable rather than performative. My marriage with Sarah continued thriving as the foundation for a life built on genuine understanding rather than tolerance or accommodation. Her family had become my primary emotional support system, while my biological family worked to earn inclusion in the authentic life I'd created beyond their limited expectations. The viral wedding video had accomplished something neither Sarah nor I had anticipated. It had forced conversations about neurodiversity acceptance in thousands of families who recognized themselves in our story. Comments continued arriving from parents, learning to see their children's differences as gifts rather than problems, and from adults with neurological differences finding courage to demand authentic acceptance from their own families. Sitting in our apartment surrounded by photos from family gatherings that now included rather than excluded my complete self, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from building life on authentic foundations rather than performing normalcy for social approval. Sarah's love had taught me that the right people will celebrate rather than tolerate individual differences, and my family's gradual transformation proved that education and commitment could overcome years of misunderstanding and shame. The boy who once accepted exclusion from family celebrations had become a man capable of creating inclusive community for himself and others, demonstrating that worth doesn't depend on others' comfort levels, but rather on the courage to exist authentically in a world that often prefers convenient fictions over complex truths. Have you ever felt excluded from family celebrations because of something that makes you different? What would it mean to you to find people who celebrate rather than tolerate all aspects of your identity? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about families that choose acceptance over comfort, and how we can all do better at including rather than excluding people who might process the world differently than we do. Thank you for taking this journey with me today, and I hope Rod and Sarah's story reminds you that authentic love requires courage, but creates connections that sustain rather than drain your spirit. If this story resonated with you, please like this video. Subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming exclusion and finding genuine acceptance, and share it with anyone who might benefit from understanding that differences deserve celebration rather than shame. Remember that your complete authentic self is worthy of love and celebration, and the people who matter will find ways to include rather than exclude you from the moments that matter most.